evening and welcome to On the Campaign Trail. Every week we try to make sense of the 2022 elections. But we know that the democratic project is in great danger, and that shapes how we think of the May 9 elections. It isn't just elections as usual. In 2022, hashtag we decide, without neglecting the other basic questions. On the campaign trail, we'll ask how we decide and why we decide. I'm John Nery, and you are on the campaign trail. Tomorrow, it will be 60 days before Election Day. And to those of us who are following the campaigns closely, whether because we are involved in campaigning or because we are reporting on the campaigners, there seems to be an excess of information to process, a surfeit of data to crunch. So many surveys, which ones to accept? So many debates, which ones to follow? So much stuff on social media, which ones to believe? So much media coverage from different angles, which ones make sense? Joining us tonight is a diverse group of esteemed academics who will help us separate the signal from the noise. Dr. Ela Atienza is Professor of Political Science at the University of the Philippines in Diliman. Professor Hadji Balajadia is a psychologist from Ateneo de Davao University. Professor Arnold Alamon is a sociologist at Mindanao State University-Iligan Institute of Technology. And Dr. Leland de la Cruz is an expert in development studies from the Ateneo de Manila University. Unfortunately, the other scholars I invited, including academics from the Visayas, could not make it today. I hope to have them on at another time. Professors Alamon, Atienza, Balajadia, and De La Cruz, thank you and welcome to the program.
Good evening, John.
Good evening, John.
Hello, good evening, everyone.
Mayang gabi, good evening. Let me start. Elections are a political exercise. Maybe we can begin our round of questions with our political scientist. Prof. Ela, what is your reading of the situation with only 2 months left before Election Day?
Yeah, thank you, John. We usually look at Philippine elections as, of course, it's very personalistic. We have weak political parties. We focus so much on the candidates. And of course, we often look at the dominance of the traditional elites, those who have money, so they can afford all these very expensive ads. And we can also see this in the campaigns, in the materials that are available. But it seems like 2022 may be a bit more different, not only because of the pandemic, and there are many things that we cannot do like before. There seems to be a change, or at least a mix, from the traditional campaigning tactics of the old politicos and machineries. But at the same time, for political scientists like me, we're seeing the mainstreaming of social movement tactics, both old social movement tactics and new. And both COMELEC rules and traditional politicians are in a way unable to really understand and catch up with new social movement tactics. They don't know how to react to all this volunteerism and activism, different styles of campaigning. Of course, in social media, we still see polarization and a lot of fake news, but there also seems to be a lot of pushback in terms of trying to fact check many things. And unlike in previous elections, there seems to be more youth involvement as well as other sectoral involvement. And it feels like because of one candidate, Bongbong Marcos, this is more than just a regular national election in the Philippines. There are endorsements and positions coming from sectors that traditionally have not really been involved or very active in elections. So it's important that in the next few months we see intensifying in campaigns because many things can change. Of course, I'm curious what the surveys will say, whether the things I'm mentioning will have an impact, but it will be curious how these new developments have will cause a dent in the results of the next round of surveys.
Thank you, Professor Ela. There's so much there to pick, and to elaborate on. We'll get to that when we have time. Professor Hadji, from your perspective as a professor of psychology, what is your read of the current state of the elections?
Every election is always emotionally charged, no? Basically, we want to disabuse each one's notion that this is a rational process, but certainly all elections, no, as an exercise of our democratic rights, is essentially a very emotionally charged process. And so what we are seeing is a strong undercurrent no, of mixed emotions there, coming from all sides. And what we are seeing is that there is really a strong polemic which we see in the political space. Also, alongside that particular um, uh, emotions, no, a host of emotions unleashed during elections. There's also a surplus of disrespectful and disinformational campaigns, no, tactics, no, and um, this basically forms part of this what we call in psychology a negative attack ads, no, which change perceptions of people on specific candidates, and um, this will result, of course, to what we call negativity effect that discredit opponents, and we have seen that one in candidates who may be at the losing end, candidates who may have the money, all the wherewithal in power, have unleashed, no, this particular tactics with what we call negative attack tactics, and this certainly undermines democracy because people are no longer that free in terms of making candidates, but rather their perceptions of candidates are mediated by untruth and lies and disinformation. So again, elections is emotionally charged process, and how can we redirect these emotions into life-giving life-giving direction towards nation building and of course to the common good, no, is something that we need to be we really need to think about, no, as a country.
Thank you, Professor Hadji. Again, there's so much to unpack there. We'll come back a little later. Professor Arnold, from your perspective as a sociologist, what is your read of the situation as of today, March 9, 2022?
Oh, thank you, Sir John. No, it's really difficult to wear the sociologist's hat given our baggage with the survey method and everything else, while at the same time you're personally and emotionally invested in this exercise. Because for the life of me, I couldn't imagine how a dictator's son, whom we threw out decades ago, is coming back, no, with all the bravado and the arrogance of somebody who imagines it is a birthright, no. But nevertheless, I'll do my best from the perspective of a Mindanaoan student. I think there's a lot of paradoxes in the 2022 elections in relation to Mindanao. No, on the one hand, you have Mindanao as an example of Marcos' brutal legacies, in the sense that, for instance, the great conflicts that tear apart our nation Mindanao is the laboratory or the experiment of that, and who is the scientist? It's Marcos, no, the senior Marcos who tore apart this country by waging wars against the Bangsamoro, at the same time waging wars also against the landless peasant class, no, who have gone to the hills to oppose his dictatorship. So Mindanao is home to Marcos victims, no, the Bangsamoro and the all-out wars, how he transformed Holo, Lanao into howling wilderness in the war of government against the Bangsamoro, and we also have the problem of the deep scars of the anti-insurgency campaign that he waged, which we still feel up to now in terms of how the military approaches the problem of peace and conflict. No? The whole issue of development aggression, how logging, large-scale agricultural enterprises and mining have taken root in indigenous territory, which have displaced indigenous communities, which continue even up to now. So, on the one hand, you have for sure, no, and I think I represent that, a deeply entrenched anti-Marcos sentiment among certain sectors, no. But at the same time, the paradox is that Mindanao is also the home for strongman rule, which is also the legacy of Marcos, no. And I think that also matters when you talk about the elections. You've known, perhaps most of you probably don't know, but most of us in the social sciences have come to the bitter realization that there's a symbiotic, almost parasitical relationship between local political processes and the national elections. No, you maintain strongman so that at a certain point in the electoral exercise, you can count on them to deliver the block votes. And these politicians on the ground are the ones who will be able to bring voters into the precinct areas and demand block votes to be given to the principal, who is the national politician. So you have those paradoxes coming into play. Who would matter more? No, the reality of history and the deeply entrenched pain that the Mindanaoans have experienced under Marcos, or will the machinery of these politicians who operate on the principle of guns, goons, and gold still determine the outcome? No, so that's one. The other is that on the one hand, you also have the Marcoses playing into the nostalgia game. No, I don't know where they got that brilliant method or tool. I was listening to Sergio Menya just this morning, and he was saying that the problem with the campaign is that Bongbong Marcos is running actually under the shadow of his father, and we need to deconstruct the father in order to also deconstruct the son. No, in other words, no, and I think that's really a telling observation about how nostalgia is playing a very important part in determining the election outcome of May 9, 2022. People are pining for lost time in the past that never was in the first place, no? And I think that has got to do with the difficulties of today and the past 2-3 decades, where people cannot differentiate between the post Marcos era and the Marcos era and the pre-Marcos era. There seems to be a kind of refusal to accept that these people have put us in a more dire situations compared to before, because they do not feel the change. No, and I think this has got a lot to do with how we have also failed in the democratic project in the past 2 or 3 decades. No, so we cannot blame normal people for pining for things that never was. They will dream, and if it means dreaming and putting into power the same patronage, feudal, emotional attachment to strongmen. No, they will gravitate towards that. But at the same time, well, that is true. I've actually participated in a number of pink rallies in the past few weeks. No, and I think we have something here that must be taken into consideration. No, there's a new activism that I feel is taking place. No, in my small circle of friends, I have friends who are mobilizing, who are not sociologically inclined, who are lawyers, who are housewives, who are veterinarians. They have, for the first time probably in their lives, no, sprung into action politically and have used their meager resources, whatever that may be, printing tarps, attending rallies, attending lugaw distribution centers for Lenny, as an expression of their political awakening, no? And you can see it also among the young, no? I mean, have you ever been into these rallies and have you felt the energy? No, I mean, I'm a veteran of rallies in Manila, I know, and usually we go to Menjola, but all we ever did was to be grim and determined. But in these rallies for Lenny, there's an energy that I could not, put my finger on, no? And there's a celebratory element to the resistance, no? People are happy that they're speaking out for the first time. People are happy that they are expressing their love for their country and for each other for the first time, no? I don't know whether I'm just biased, but I was really touched when I was attending one of these rallies and this kid with a DSLR camera on her body, hanging on her neck, obviously covering the events, also had a garbage bag with her, and even before the program was ending, she on her own was picking up trash, no? And people have been telling me that in different rallies that's also the case, and the placards are another thing, no? I
Yeah.
mean,
So really,
jaded, the activists can't even come up with those things, no? But so it's
yeah.
full of paradoxes. There's nostalgia, and that's a powerful force, but there's also a social movement brewing.
Yes, we'll return to those twin paradoxes in a bit. I like the image of no longer grim and determined, but joyful and determined, no? Activists. Last but certainly not least, Professor Leland, from your pioneering work as a development studies specialist, what is your reading of the current situation?
I think we have to pay attention to the current context because we're 7 weeks away from the peak of Omicron, that sudden surge that we had December to January. So we're 7 weeks away from that peak. We're at alert level 1 in almost all the areas in the country. People are starting to go out. People are starting to go back to work. And I put emphasis on this because then in a sense, COVID is still there, but we're paying less and less attention to it as we go along. And I think the core issues of the electorate, of most of the electorate, will come to the fore again. Issues like employment, issues like income, kita, kabuhayan. These things resonated before the surge. We were doing FGDs with people both in urban and rural areas. At yun talaga yung lumalabas. These are the top 9 concerns, not even COVID. In rural areas, questions about what will happen to agriculture. And that's why they say that during the Marcos era, supposedly, that agriculture had its heyday, which of course is not exactly true. So we're back to those issues during this particular period in time where we sort of have a lull from COVID. And then, of course, this will be accentuated because of the rising oil prices. Then we'll have to deal with inflation. Electricity prices might also increase, especially as we approach the summer. As people go back to work, transportation becomes even more of a problem. So all of those things are part of the background. And in a sense, these are things that the candidates probably will have to deal with during these next few months, of the campaign.
Thank you. Can I direct my first follow-up to you, Dr. Leland? Who does this benefit? If COVID is no longer the paramount issue, and these issues will re-emerge, yung kita, kabuhayan, and so on, Is there a candidate or is there a campaign that will be taking advantage or that will enjoy the benefit of these issues resurfacing?
I guess then the administration candidates can sort of claim that then we can really have some sort of continuity as tourist areas start to open up again. You know, then these things, the COVID problems, you know, the mishandling of that particular situation might become more distant. Actually, to some extent, it seems like in areas outside, say, Metro Manila and the urban centers, it was never really at the foreground. It was important, but the issues of livelihood were always important. You know, were always at the foreground.
Mhm.
So that's one thing that we have to consider. Who has and I guess one of the other things is who has the plan to address the impending increase in oil prices and the impending inflation? Who can deal with those kinds of problems?
Thank you. You mentioned an administration candidate or administration candidates, and you spoke of continuity. Professor Ella, is there in fact an administration candidate? When Bongbong Marcos runs under a theme of babangon muli, no, let us
Yeah.
rise again, is he in fact the administration candidate?
Actually, at
Or is
this
there
point,
someone
we
else?
don't have. Yeah, we don't have a true administration candidate. Of course, the faction of Pusi in PDP Laban has endorsed Sara Duterte as vice president, but there are many candidates that are trying to be the continuity candidate. So that's the sad part about the administration. There is no administration candidate. There is no clear administration candidate, and it's also it also sends a wrong signal that Bongbong Marcos is about talks about babangon muli. So it seems like it's also a criticism of the administration. So it's sending mixed signals. While there are a few candidates like Isko Moreno and maybe in the peace and order area, Ping Lacson, they are also trying to push for continuities in some of the programs of the president.
Speaking of mixed signals, Professor Hadji, you did speak of elections being an emotionally charged process, but this year seems to be particularly mixed in terms of signals being sent. Professor Arnold already brought in his Mindanao background. He's been teaching in MSU for a long time. I wanted to ask you, in what way does your Mindanao experience influence your reading of the elections as of today?
Well, let me just perhaps give a full disclosure that as Mindanaoan, we always give premium to our bias to Mindanao lens, and it's something that is difficult to give up each time we have a chance of putting forward even our own disciplinal opinion on matters such as elections and democracy. And in the last few years, we have seen Mindanao turn, or the turn to Mindanao. People are looking at how Mindanao will play or figure in the national discourse, particularly in this particular election. And we've seen that one in the rise, for example, of the current dispensation, President Duterte. And this particular lens is something which is something strong in us, and we always give premium to how candidates will consider Mindanao, not only in their agenda but also in creating their messages of the political messages. For example, it appears that Mindanaoans are also looking for a Mindanaoan candidate in this particular election. And quite strangely, surveys will tell you that the front runner in the presidency, Bongbong Marcos, is strangely not takes a huge part of support, no, from Mindanao, from the recent uh, um, survey, in spite of the fact that Mindanao is home to the um, uh, most atrocious and most brutal uh, um, uh, human rights violations during the martial law. So here we are looking at again, um, a president, for example, that is really for Mindanao, or perhaps has a plan for Mindanaoans, no? And we basically had this platform in Mindanao, Kusog Mindanao for that matter, and then we asked Mindanaoans uh, uh, what would actually be the most influential or the most important issue that candidates should address. And the primary issue is really livelihood, as Leland would say, it's really livelihood. So who among the candidates, we're also looking for candidates who can put forward a program, who may ensure that that livelihood will really be assured, no, in whenever they are going to win.
Thank you. Before I turn to Professor Ela and Professor Leland and ask them about Imperial Manila, I have one more question about Mindanao. So for both Ms. Hadji and Professor Arnold. Professor Arnold brought up that first pair of paradoxes. Mindanao is both the laboratory for the mad scientist known as the dictator Ferdinand Marcos. At the same time, it is the home of strong men, and we have one right now serving as our overlord. But is it possible that for the second time in our history, Mindanao will play yet again a crucial role in electing the next president? Do you see that as the role again of Mindanao? I think Mindanao is about 15 million voters. If you estimate, maybe 12 million of them will vote. So about 12 million votes are at stake. Do you think that Mindanao will yet again play a crucial role in selecting the next president?
Should I answer or should Hadj answer first?
Professor
I'll
Arnold,
answer.
you're on mute.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll answer.
Okay.
Sorry. Yes, Professor Hadji first.
Okay, I think um, there's already evidence that we are really playing a
Sorry.
central role, and
My
that's
apologies.
basic.
Yeah, we can't hear you right now. We're having some
Okay,
technical
am
glitches.
I audible?
Even our audio is sending mixed signals. Professor Arnold, can you
I
try
can
it again?
hear her.
I can
Okay,
hear.
can you hear me now? Okay. Okay, great. You, sir, John,
Sorry.
John, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, whether Mindanao will play a role, yeah, probably a heartbreaking role. It's something that the surveys are already intimate, but I'm not giving up on it because I would like to believe that kaya pang habulin, no? Again, I think this has got a lot to do with the fact that people cannot see the difference between the pre-Marcos, Marcos, and the post-Marcos era. It has all been difficulty for them, and that's why instead of looking forward, uh, considering new horizons, they don't see any difference in going back. At least in going back, is some kind of a filial patron in the person of the son of the late dictator will come in and take care of them. No? So, and that's in the DNA of the political processes in Mindanao. No, the strongman culture is very well entrenched. And you can see that in the rise of Duterte into power. You can see that in the different quote unquote warlords in the different provinces all over Mindanao, and that's why the trope, the model of the warlord, the caring patron, is very accessible. Yeah, compared to the trappings of new and more energetic forms of political figures, no? So
Okay.
it's something that we need to deal with definitely, as we think about the next few phases of the campaign.
Mhm.
Professor Hadji?
Yes. I just want to perhaps put forward the the fact that Mindanao has already been playing a central role even in the determination of the 2022 elections, and we have seen that one in the surveys. The previous survey, the recent survey, will tell us that it's Sara Duterte which basically delivered a huge support for the candidacy of the figures, no, the high figures of the Marcoses. But the solid North in that case, unfortunately, has not yet registered their support for Sara Duterte. And in that case, it appears that there is some sort of a solid South which is at play here,
Mhm.
and 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 no one I think can win without, of course, the support of Mindanao, because even if we may be at the margins for historically and of course developmentally speaking, we have been pushing for, we have been registering solid vote in that case, and so perhaps the question really is how you can we optimize this solid South, not to veer away from a looming Marcos presidency.
Thank you. I have many more questions in my lineup. So I'm just going to direct the next question, not to the two of you, Professor Ella, Professor Leland, maybe just now for Professor Ella. Uh, we all come from different places, but once in so-called Imperial Manila, perhaps our perspective changes too. Professor Ella, how does your sense of what's happening in Metro Manila electorally influence your reading of the overall situation?
Well, it does contribute a lot in terms of what I see. Although I'm also from Luzon. I'm from Batangas, so I'm also keeping up with developments there. And I think what I observe basically has been influenced not only because of having stayed most of my years in the last few years in
Mhm.
Metro Manila, but at the same time also because I continue. It's quite near, so I am through social media. I'm updated with what's happening in Region 4.
Mm.
So
Thank
my
you.
reflections are also based on two regions.
Thank you. My next question is for Professor Leland. In my introduction, I pointed to those of us who follow the elections closely in various ways. We are all professionally invested in the campaigns. But what about those who are paying not too much attention to the elections just yet? May I ask Professor Leland, in your view, how do these low interest audiences see the elections at this point in time?
Uh, I know a few people who are like that, and the word that comes out is they're confused. Nalilito sila. Especially because we've had so much misinformation over the past actually more than 6 years. We've been dealing with so much misinformation. Third world studies of UP actually spotted the misinformation very early on. So we've been dealing with a lot of that misinformation. And what I guess makes it confusing for some people now is that there's some pushback against that misinformation. I actually saw a post of a friend who lives in Payatas. And sabi niya nalilito na siya sa election. Di na niya alam kung anong iboboto niya. Dahil ayun na nga kasi nakikita na niya na okay, ito yung alam ko, kaya lang ito yung naririnig ko ngayon. So ano ba talaga yung totoo? I just watched a vlog of one of my friends who's currently in Butuan. It's the same thing. He was talking to somebody, and that person used to be a BBM supporter, but now she met VP Lenny, and now she's supporting VP Lenny. And the remarks that she made was, hindi pala totoo yung mga sinasabi. Yung parang ganun. So we're at that stage where I think the pushback is helping. Before, people just took the information for granted, sat back and said, I support BBM or something like that. But now with the pushback that's happening, I think people are getting confused, which for, I guess, VP Lenny supporters is a good sign because it opens up the possibility of conversion. I think that's where a lot of people who were sort of just passively consuming information about the elections are right now.
Thank you. There has been an unusual surge of endorsements. This might be one of the factors which Professor Ela pointed to earlier. This is an unusual election. An unusual surge of endorsement for the candidacy of Vice President Leni Robredo, specifically by educators and educational institutions. Can we, as educators, talk about this in some detail? There's actually a lot that we can say here, but I would really appreciate if we can, just focus on maybe the most important things. I want to hear from all four of you. Professor Ela, maybe can you talk about the upside of these endorsements?
Well, the upside of this endorsement is that we have people who are actually teaching not only about Philippine history, but also all aspects of the Philippines. These are people who are specialists, and they see the importance of the programs and not just the personality of a particular candidate. So it does carry some weight, although of course we're also in a very polarized environment where some groups have actually raised a lot of anti-intellectual sentiments. But in a way, it does say something about how experts are trying to be heard and to have a say in Philippine elections.
Professor Arnold, what do you think is driving institutions to come together and issue these unusual endorsements?
I apologize. I cannot make that same proud announcement. That's the same thing for Mindanao institutions. If you were to look at my impression of my colleagues and in the university I belong to, we're very polarized, no. But what I see happening as very encouraging is how the students, the young ones, have taken on the cudgels on our behalf, our generation's behalf. They're the ones who are attending the VP Leni Robredo's rallies in Iligan, MSU-IIT, right now in Butuan. You have Caraga State University, and in Cagayan de Oro, that's basically Xavier University led, no, organized by young ones, no, and you can see a kind of social movement coming from this group. So I'd probably reverse the formula and say that not the older ones, but actually it's the young members of our educational institutions who are taking the lead. No, if anyone is going to do a quick survey, many of those who are peopling these people Leni Robredo rallies are young students in college or even in high school. No? And that's something we must take a look at. If we can be able to harness their energy towards productive political ends, then we might see a turnaround in the next few weeks, if that's the case. No?
Thank you. Professor Hadji, can we talk about that? What is driving, not institutions, but individuals, like the individuals that Professor Arnold pointed to come together and, force these endorsements?
Yeah, I think there's always that strong sense of push, not to really identify with a particular group, and therefore some sort of social identity that they wish to be part of and could really put forward. No, like for example, you can. I was even looking at the news reports, and there were a lot of groups, no, endorsing, no, and even identifying themselves, no, and one of which even that made me smile was actually the flat-chested for Lenny. These are basically these circles are part of a strong need to be socially identified with the specific groups, no? And you have also specific experts and even religious organizations, and even pastors and priests endorsing specific candidates. But let's also be mindful that these are leaders who want to put forward their gravitas and their authority, no, and their stature in society, and that they want to have a say and they want to figure in the national discourse. And hoping that this will be their endorsement will be basically picked up by the younger generations. But it appears that Professor Alamon said that the young ones have already led, no, in that particular direction. What my concern though is that while these endorsements are appearing or surfacing, let's be mindful also that this may also pose a very othering effect, no, to others, because this might appear to be elitist and all, no, most especially if we are talking to the class C, D, and E. This may be a very middle class thingy. It may appeal to the middle class thing, and there are class lines behind this endorsement, and we have to be very mindful of that. But yeah, it may be effective in one particular political class, but may not necessarily be reaching the class C, D, and E.
Yeah, in fact, that was my question that I had prepared for Doc Leland. Is there a downside to these endorsements? Maybe I can just tweak my question, Doc Leland, and ask you: should there be and should we hear from other groups endorsing the vice president?
Yeah, on the educational institutions, I tend to discount those, especially given our experience in 2019. I mean, Ocho Derecho won most universities in 2019, but they still didn't win in the election. So I don't give much weight. I appreciate the endorsements of the educational institutions, but I don't give much weight. The only thing that can happen is if those students of Professor Arnold, our students, actually go out and campaign. You cannot just be a vote in a mock election to express your sentiment. You really have to go out. I think that was the difference in 2019. People weren't really engaged. Who else has to endorse? I think I give more weight actually to celebrities. Celebrities. This afternoon, I saw a picture of Daniel Padilla. I'm sorry, pero diba? I mean, that's the way to reach the market, and that's the way to reach a lot of voters. No? So I think celebrities matter. I've been on Twitter saying that celebrities should go out and do house to house, join the volunteer centers. No. Also, as mentioned by our colleagues from Mindanao, a lot of people associate leadership with strong men. And the criticism of VP Lenny is that she's mahina. No, I think part of it is because he's sorry, but to be he's not a man. No? So parang people associate women with weakness, which is of course not true. That's why you need strong men to endorse her. Who are we talking about? Strong men, mayors, or governors, or ex-military people, PNP, or even celebrities who are more masculine. So, yeah, ganyang baka. So Edu already came out with a little ad. So, yung mga ganyan, no? Baka that might capture a certain segment which is not currently being captured by VP Lenny's campaign.
Thank you. We're running long, but I still have a few more questions. The next one may be a little tricky because it deals with another discipline, statistics. But in your fields, you do make use of the laws of probability, and for research, you also conduct your own surveys. At the risk of trespassing on epistemological boundaries, may I ask you, which of the surveys should we believe as reasonably trustworthy? Or, maybe more to the point, which surveys, quote unquote, should we ignore?
Mm.
Okay, can I hear from all of you? Maybe I can start with Professor Arnold.
Yeah. That I was referring to that a while ago when I said that I come from discipline with that kind of baggage. Sociology is founded on the idea that we can predict things on the basis of the law of probability, and it depends upon how robust your methods are. And these people who are running the surveys are actually, many of them are colleagues from the same sociological association. And we know that aside from elections, these surveys have proven to be very accurate as long as the methods are correct, as long as the sampling sizes are, and the so I carry with me that baggage that every self-respecting campaign should look at the surveys as good barometers of their reach and their and the effectivity of their campaigns. No, even at this point, no, we should listen to the surveys. No, and not all of them have been contradicting in terms of the numbers. No, but I'm curious about how it is since 1 week, 2 weeks ago, up to the next survey period. If in case there's really a snowball or a bandwagon taking place, which is beyond the purview of surveys. On the other hand, we're looking at surveys as a good tool, but they're not infallible. In the end, we create society and through our actions. And if people use the surveys as a guide to tweak their campaigns, then maybe we'll see results.
Professor Leland, you understand numbers. Which surveys should we follow?
I think surveys can only be assessed in retrospect. So you have to, ganun talaga eh. I mean, you have to look at the performance of surveys in the past and see who were close to the actual results of the last one. New survey outfits will have to be treated with a grain of salt and they have to prove their worth in the coming elections. I mean, I just to be realistic about it, I think that's the best way to go.
Yeah.
Professor Ela?
Yeah, I think even those who conduct surveys also say the limitations of their research. And I'm a quantitative political scientist, but I have worked with colleagues who are involved in doing survey research, and they do tell us something, but at a certain point in time. And which one should we give? I think there are a number of survey firms with clear methodology, well established, with a good reputation. So we should worry of companies that just emerged recently with unclear methodology, those who cannot explain who was there, who were their sample. So they're useful and indicative, but of course they do not determine what will happen. There are still many things that will happen in the next few months.
Thank you. Professor Hadji, if you don't mind, let me tweak my question about surveys a bit and bring in the psychology of crowds. I've argued in one column that mobilization is the message for the Robredo campaign. Can you weigh in on surveys versus crowds?
Well, surveys are, as Leland would say, surveys are irrespective of even performance, no, of on the ground, no. But let me just perhaps say that I think the Robredo campaign, if it is to use the survey, it must be able to the crowd must be reflected in the surveys. No, I think that will be, you know, if surveys are to be reflective of what's really happening on the ground, then I think the strategy of VP Lenny at this time should really, it must ensure that this crowd are reflected also in surveys. So again, let me just say that surveys are analogous to a particular time in a particular period, and they may not necessarily uh, 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 predict not the not necessarily predict the outcome of the elections, and because surveys are only valid and true in that particular time and period where the survey was conducted. But again, it is educational for the campaign managers and the political parties, no, if there are any, uh, uh, running the electoral show. And I think we must be mindful of surveys that are scientific and unscientific, and some of these surveys are really paid surveys, particularly the ones which are not randomized, and properly sampled, and only perhaps the astute mind and the trained mind can figure this out. But there are two survey outfits which are respected, very much respected, and historically um, been accurate in putting out their numbers, and it's SWS and of course the Pulse Asia. Hopefully, people will learn from these surveys and the numbers that they reflect, and strategize according to what these numbers actually speak about their candidates.
I like what you said at the start. No, the crowd must be reflected in the surveys. Um, we're running long, but I'd like to ask one more question. It's been said it's difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. So I'm not going to ask you to make a prediction about the May 9 results, but if you could favor us, no, with maybe an answer, 30 seconds each, uh, what would be the one factor you think that will shape the outcome on May 9? Let's do this geographically. Let's start from the solid south. We'll start from Professor Hadji, who's in Davao, and then Professor Alamon, who is in Iligan. And then we move to the Republic of Quezon City, and then the Independent Republic of Marikina.
Well, I think I'd like to say that people first. If we cannot basically give primacy to the people, the basic masses, then we will lose these elections. No, the power must be centered on the people, and without focusing much attention, no, or all our energies and even resources to reach the basic sectors, reach the basic masses, and then we'll reshape the narrative and the direction of these elections.
Thank you. People first. Professor Arnold?
I was actually troubled by the question that you raised because I really could not provide a single answer. But what really struck me is the message of hope. If people carry or see in a candidate that he or she provides them with hope instead of just going back to the old recycled politicians and old family names, then maybe that's the important thing that will be able to twist the elections. But on the one hand, I don't really see this as starting and ending with the electoral exercise. No, I see a generation that is politically awakened. Even if we win or if we lose, I think what is hopeful about this whole process is that people have bought into the game. No, people have staked their opinions and are fighting on Facebook over this. No, for me, that's a hopeful indication that our democratic practices are still alive, nevertheless.
Thank you. Message of hope. Professor Ela?
Um, in my case, I agree with Arnold that definitely, as a political scientist,
the elections is just one stage in the political process. Voting is just one form of political participation. But I see what is happening now and until May, and hopefully after, is that we're trying to imagine and reimagine the direction of the nation. So we're in the process of nation building. So I want to move from personalities and candidates, but focus on the people and nation building.
Thank you. So collective reimagination of what it means to be nation. And last but certainly not least, Professor Leland.
I'll cheat and give two. Guys, quick lang. The first is the debates. No? So the national debates will matter. The second is the ground campaign. If people can really organize on the ground, it can't just be all social media, air campaign. It has to be boots on the ground. People going house to house, talking to other people.
Thank you. So the debates and a ground campaign. What a fascinating discussion. I would like to complement this in the future by inviting your fellow academics from the Visayas. But for your time and your insights, thank you very much, Professor Leland de la Cruz, Professor Hadji Balajadia, Professor Arnold Alamon, and Professor Ela Atienza. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for us tonight. Join us again next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Follow us on the campaign trail, because it isn't just elections as usual. This is John Nery. Good night.